As is the case everywhere, Canada's actions in Myanmar, Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela are guided by an unequivocal commitment to protecting and promoting human rights. The crimes against humanity committed against the Rohingya of Myanmar, including the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war, are utterly unacceptable. Canada's Parliament unanimously adopted a motion naming these crimes as genocide and urging the Security Council to refer these appalling acts to the ICC. The plight of the Rohingya people demands a response. Canada is appalled by crimes the Assad regime in Syria has committed against its own people, including, most horrifically, the use of banned chemical weapons. Syrians rightly demand accountability and hope for an enduring political solution. The White Helmets, many of whom gathered evidence of chemical weapon attacks at risk of death, rightly expect our support in seeking justice. In Canada's own hemisphere, an OAS panel of independent international experts carefully documented many of the crimes being committed by the Maduro regime against its own people. Here, too, Venezuelans hope for accountability. For this reason, we and our regional partners took the exceptional step of referring this case to the ICC.
There is no doubt whatsoever that the illegal annexation and occupation that are ongoing in the Crimea are a violation of international law. The respect for the sovereignty of states and for their territorial integrity is not a mere theoretical nicety, it is a founding principle of the Charter of the United Nations. We cannot allow Russia to continue with these destabilizing measures. Our determination to hold the perpetrators of these crimes in Myanmar, Syria, Ukraine and Venezuela responsible for their crimes and actions goes hand in hand with our long-standing commitment to do all we can to improve the humanitarian situation of the millions of people affected both in these countries and in the broader regions they call home. We are very well aware that a disproportionate part of the burden of offering vital support to so many people is ascribed to neighbouring countries, and we promise them that they can continue to count on our aid and support. We will continue to make our contribution to the efforts underway by the United Nations to address and eradicate these problems.
When the international rules-based order was designed, this Assembly mandated the Security Council to authorize the use of force, to keep the peace, and to keep us safe. 70 years later, that remains its core responsibility. The Security Council agenda is replete with persistent and emerging challenges. Some security threats we know all too well. Others are emerging, and others still we have yet to anticipate. But all are systemic and require collective responses. Be they old or new, these threats will continue to test the Security Council's ability to adapt and respond. That is why Canada is seeking a non-permanent seat on the Security Council in 2021-2022. We are confident that we can contribute to effective, carefully considered global responses. We have a proven record of working with other member states to bring fresh ideas and innovative approaches to tackle complex problems, from peacekeeping and policing to peace building and transitions. We're confident that we can harness the diversity of ideas and experience necessary to fashion forward-looking approaches that can work. After all, bringing people together is our calling card. A capacity for cooperation defines our national character. Inclusion is part of our identity. When Canada has served on the UN Security Council, we've done so inclusively. We brought other states and civil society into the conversation. We championed the women, peace and security agenda and human security. We fought for the protection of civilians caught in the crossfire of armed conflict. If elected to the Security Council, we will bring to bear our long-standing dedication to peacekeeping, our over 30 years of service as chair of the UN Special Committee on Peacekeeping Operation and our active membership on the Peacebuilding Commission. If elected, we will work with others to tackle climate change and violent extremism and to promote economic security and the empowerment of women and girls. We will champion inclusion and accountability, openness and transparency in all of the United Nations Security Council deliberation. Is a risk for governments and people, but also for investors. We ought to identify the opportunities in our challenges. We ought to look at new partnerships to harness new opportunities. As our Secretary General says, climate change is the defining issue of our time. A significant component of the response to climate change is new, greener, and more resilient infrastructure. This represents a $26 trillion opportunity for us all. To harness this opportunity, starting with the most vulnerable, small island states, we must all work together with scientists, multilateral institutions, regional banks, investors, and civil society like never before. Not building essential infrastructure is not an option. As Prime Minister Trudeau said in this very assembly, developing countries should not be punished for a problem they did not create, nor should they be deprived the opportunities for clean growth that developed nations are now pursuing. And we should all support Africa as it works to create opportunities for its youth and meet the ambitions of its Agenda 2063 through greater economic integration and prosperity. Doing so is key to a more secure world. Greater and more shared prosperity leads to greater peace. Le désir de rassembler les gens.
The desire to bring people together is at the very heart of the Canadian identity. In Canada, we understand that diversity is our strength. The Indigenous peoples of Canada are the cornerstone of our diversity. They speak more than 60 different languages between them, and their cultures are among the richest and most diverse in the continent. In addition, 1 Canadian in 5 is born outside the country. Our largest urban centres are amongst the most cosmopolitan in the world. More than half of the population of both Vancouver and of Toronto was born abroad. Canada has been welcoming refugees and new Canadians for decades now. As you all know, Canada is very proud of having welcomed more than 50 Syrian refugees over the last 3 years. We are fully aware, nonetheless, that many countries are also showing great leadership in welcoming many more refugees than we are. I do want to highlight one thing that makes me very proud. That is the fact that 40% of the Syrian refugees that we have played host to have been directly sponsored by citizens of Canada who wanted to do their bit to help. Of course, in order to live up to the standards we have set ourselves and carry our share of the burden in terms of economic and social integration and the promotion thereof, more still needs to be done. Although we have seen significant successes, we have made missteps along the way, and there are still challenges that need to be met and overcome, chief among them being reconciliation with the First Nations. In Canada, we understand that we need to listen and to learn in order to contribute to better outcomes. And that is what we do both within and without our borders.
We're using our G7 presidency this year both to listen as well as to learn from others, but also to innovate and break down silos. For the first time, to ensure that governments were delivering in a more cohesive manner, Canada convened ministers of finance and ministers of international development together to explore new ways of financing development. We can't afford anymore to have discussions at the UN that are distinct from those at the World Bank or the IMF. We also felt very strongly that the G7 needed to tackle the issue of climate resilience and disaster recovery. While Canada has its own extensive coastlines and borders on 3 oceans, we invited small island, coastal African, and Southeast Asian states to this critical conversation. Building on the UN Oceans Conference, this discussion produced a charter seeking to ban the use of plastics in our ocean and is paving the way to the Sustainable Blue Economy Conference in Nairobi in November that Canada is so proud to be co-hosting with Kenya. We will help to find solutions to build a safer, fairer, and more secure world, where the benefits of the international rules-based order are distributed more evenly. We are confident that the institutions we have spent more than 7 decades building can be renewed and revitalized. But we can only do this effectively if we do it together. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.